when Jacob Mercer's wife abandoned him with nothing but a cruel letter. He thought his heart was buried forever, until a chance collision with a rejected mail-order bride carrying her own painful correspondence changed everything. But when his unfaithful wife returns demanding forgiveness, will Jacob choose the safety of his past, or risk everything for a love that could heal them both? The smell of burning bacon filled Jacob Mercer's small cabin as he stood frozen at his kitchen table, staring at the letter that had arrived 3 days ago. Outside, the Wyoming Territory wind howled through the valley like a wild animal, but inside, everything felt dead quiet. His hands shook as he read Margaret's words again. "I cannot pretend anymore, Jacob. I have found someone who makes me feel alive." The bacon popped and sizzled in the pan, sending up black smoke that stung his eyes. Jacob didn't move to turn off the heat. He couldn't seem to move at all. The letter crumpled in his fist as he remembered their wedding day just 8 months ago, when Margaret had smiled at him like he was the only man in the world. "Stupid," he whispered to the empty room. "Stupid, stupid, stupid." The cabin door burst open, letting in a rush of cold October air. His neighbor, Henry Dalton, stomped inside without knocking, as usual. Henry was a big man with a red beard and a voice that could wake the dead. "Jacob, what in tarnation are you doing? Your bacon's burning, and the smoke's coming out your chimney like a signal fire." Jacob finally moved, grabbing the pan and shoving it off the stove. The bacon looked like pieces of charcoal. "Sorry, Henry. I was thinking." Henry's sharp eyes spotted the letter on the table. "That from your wife?" Jacob nodded, unable to speak. Henry had warned him about Margaret from the start. "She's too fancy for this place," he'd said, "too used to city life." But Jacob had been so in love, so sure he could make her happy. "What'd she say?" Henry asked, sitting down in one of Jacob's wooden chairs. The chair creaked under his weight. "She left me." The words came out like a croak. "For some man named Richard in Denver. Says I'm too quiet, too boring. Says living with me is like being buried alive." Henry let out a long whistle. "That's a hard blow, son." Jacob laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "She took everything. The good dishes, the silver brush set, even the quilt her mother made for us. Left me this letter and nothing else." "Women," Henry said, shaking his head. "They're like wild horses. Some you can gentle, some you can't." "I thought I could make her happy," Jacob said. "I worked so hard, saved every penny to buy her nice things. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough." Henry stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray mountains. "You know what your problem is, Jacob? You think too much about what other people want. Never thought about what you want." "I wanted her to stay." "No, you wanted her to want to stay. Big difference." Jacob stared at the burnt bacon on his plate. His stomach felt sick, but he hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. Everything tasted like sawdust. "I don't know what to do now, Henry. I don't know how to be alone again." "You ain't alone," Henry said. "You got neighbors. You got work. You got a life that don't depend on some woman who don't know a good man when she sees one." "But I loved her." "I know you did, son. I know you did." Henry moved toward the door, then stopped. "You know what? I got something that might cheer you up. My mail-order bride is coming on the stage tomorrow. Clara Whitfield, from Atlanta. Been writing to her for months. Maybe meeting a nice woman will remind you that not all females are heartbreakers." Jacob wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I don't think I'm ready to meet anyone new." "Don't have to marry her," Henry laughed. "Just be polite. She's coming all this way to start a new life. Least we can do is welcome her proper." After Henry left, Jacob sat alone in his kitchen, surrounded by the smell of burnt food and broken dreams. The letter lay on the table like a dead thing. He picked it up one more time, reading the words that had destroyed his world. Margaret's handwriting was beautiful, neat and flowing like she was, but the words cut deep. She wrote about how the mountains made her feel trapped, how the long winter nights drove her crazy, how she needed excitement and adventure. She wrote about Richard, who made her laugh and took her dancing and promised her a life full of wonderful things. "I hope you can forgive me someday," she'd written at the end. "You're a good man, Jacob, but you're not the right man for me." Jacob folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket, right over his heart. Tomorrow, Henry's bride would arrive, and life would go on. But tonight, he would sit in his empty cabin and try to figure out how to put the pieces of himself back together. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows and making the walls creak. Jacob wondered if this was how it would always be now. Just him and the wind and the endless, empty silence. The morning stage was late, as usual. Jacob stood on the wooden platform outside Murphy's General Store, watching the dust cloud on the horizon grow bigger. Beside him, Henry paced back and forth like a caged bear, checking his pocket watch every few seconds. "She's coming," Henry said for the 10th time. "Clara Whitfield. All the way from Atlanta, Georgia. Can you believe it?" Jacob couldn't believe much of anything anymore. His head felt fuzzy from lack of sleep, and his stomach cramped from hunger. He'd tried to eat breakfast, but everything tasted like dirt. The letter from Margaret still sat in his pocket, heavy as a stone. "What if she don't like me?" Henry asked, running his hands through his red beard. "What if she takes one look at this place and runs back to Georgia?" "She won't," Jacob said, though he wasn't sure of anything. "She came all this way. She must want to be here." The stage finally rumbled into town, pulled by 6 tired horses covered in dust and sweat. The driver, old Pete Morrison, climbed down slowly, his back creaking like old wood. Pete had been driving the stage route for 15 years and knew everyone in 3 counties. "Afternoon, boys," Pete said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Got a passenger for you, Henry. Real pretty lady. Been asking about Millbrook for the last 50 miles. Henry's face lit up like Christmas morning. "That's her. That's Clara." The stage door opened, and Jacob watched Henry's future wife step down. She was small and neat, with auburn hair pinned up under a traveling hat. Her dress was simple but clean, and she carried herself with quiet dignity. She looked around the dusty main street with curious eyes, not disappointed or scared like Jacob had expected. "Miss Whitfield?" Henry stepped forward, hat in hand. "I'm Henry Dalton. We've been writing to each other." Clara smiled, and Jacob could see why Henry had fallen for her through letters. She had a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Mr. Dalton, it's so nice to finally meet you." Henry beamed and reached for her carpetbag. "Let me help you with that. How was your journey? Are you tired? Hungry? I got a nice cabin all ready for you. And Mrs. Ploss, Patterson at the hotel, said she'd make you her special stew." Clara's smile flickered for just a moment. "Actually, Mr. Dalton, I need to speak with you about something." Of course. We got all the time in the world." Henry turned to Jacob. "Clara, this is my neighbor, Jacob Mercer. He's the one I told you about in my letters." Jacob tipped his hat. "Ma'am." "Mr. Mercer," Clara said politely. Then she turned back to Henry. "Mr. Dalton, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I received a letter from you last week." Henry's face went pale. "A letter? I didn't send no letter last week." Clara reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded paper. "It said you'd changed your mind about our arrangement, that you'd found someone else more suitable." "What?" Henry grabbed the letter, his hands shaking. "I never wrote this. This ain't my handwriting." Jacob moved closer, reading over Henry's shoulder. The letter was written in careful script, nothing like Henry's messy scrawl. It was signed with Henry's name, but the words were cold and cruel. "I don't understand," Clara said quietly. "If you didn't write this letter, then who did?" "I got no idea," Henry said, his voice getting louder. "But I sure as heck didn't write it. I've been waiting for you for weeks. I got your room all ready, picked wildflowers for the table, even learned how to make biscuits." Tears started to fill Clara's eyes. Then why would someone do this? Why would they want to hurt me? Jacob felt anger rising in his chest. Someone had played a cruel trick on this woman, just like Margaret had played a cruel trick on him. "Ma'am, don't you worry. We'll figure this out." "No," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "I understand now. Someone in this town doesn't want me here. They think I'm not good enough for Mr. Dalton. Or maybe they think I'm some kind of loose woman." "That's not true," Henry said. "You're wonderful. Your letters were so kind and smart and funny, I don't care what anyone thinks." But Clara was already backing away toward the stage. I should go back to Atlanta. This was a mistake. "Wait," Jacob said, stepping forward. Something about her quiet dignity reminded him of his mother, who had faced down creditors and gossips with her head held high. "Don't let whoever wrote that letter win. They want you to run away. Don't give them that satisfaction." Clara looked at him with surprise. "You don't even know me." "I know you're brave," Jacob said. "You traveled 1,000 miles to start a new life. That takes courage. Don't let some coward with a pen steal that from you." Henry nodded eagerly. "Jacob's right. Please, Clara, stay and give me a chance. Give us a chance." Clara stood there in the dusty street, looking between Henry's hopeful face and Jacob's determined one. People were starting to gather around, whispering and pointing. Jacob could see the exact moment when she made her decision. "All right," she said firmly. "I'll stay, but I want to find out who wrote that letter. And when I do, they're going to answer for it." Henry whooped with joy and grabbed her carpetbag. "You won't regret this, Clara. I promise you won't regret this." As they walked toward the hotel, Jacob caught Clara's eye. She mouthed the words, "Thank you," and gave him a small smile. For the first time in 3 days, Jacob felt something other than pain in his chest. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he could still do some good in this world. But as they disappeared into the hotel, Jacob noticed a figure watching from the shadows between buildings. Someone who didn't want Clara Whitfield in Millbrook. Someone who had tried to drive her away before she even arrived. The question was, who had written that letter, and what would they do next? The schoolhouse bell clanged wildly in the wind as Jacob hammered the last nail into the broken roof beam. Below him, Clara's voice drifted up through the October air, patient and kind, as she helped little Emma Patterson with her letters. 3 weeks had passed since Clara's arrival, and she'd become the settlement's unofficial teacher after old Mr. Henderson hurt his back. "Mr. Mercer," Clara called from the doorway, "could you come down here for a moment?" Jacob climbed down the ladder, brushing sawdust from his shirt. Inside the one-room schoolhouse, 8 children sat at mismatched desks, their faces bright with curiosity. Clara stood at the front, holding a piece of paper. "Emma found this under her desk," Clara said, her voice tight with worry. "It's another letter." Jacob's stomach dropped. Over the past 3 weeks, Clara had received 5 anonymous letters, each one crueler than the last. They called her terrible names, accused her of being a woman of loose morals, and demanded she leave Millbrook immediately. "What does this one say?" Jacob asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Clara glanced at the children, then stepped closer to Jacob. "It says I have until Sunday to leave town, or something bad will happen to anyone who helps me." "Sunday?" Jacob's hands clenched into fists. "That's only 4 days away." "I know." Clara folded the letter carefully. "Maybe I should go, Jacob. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me." "No," Jacob said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. We'll figure this out." But even as he said the words, Jacob felt a cold fear in his chest. Someone in Millbrook hated Clara enough to threaten violence. Someone who watched her every move, who knew where she worked and lived and spent her time. "Children," Clara said, turning back to the class, "let's practice our reading. Tommy, would you please read the next paragraph?" As the lesson continued, Jacob studied each face in the room. Could one of these innocent children be carrying messages for the letter writer? Or was someone watching the schoolhouse right now, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising the first snow of the season. Jacob had planned to ask Clara to have dinner with him and Henry tonight, but now he wondered if she'd be safer staying locked in her hotel room. "Mr. Mercer?" Little Sarah Miller raised her hand. "My mama says some ladies in town are having a meeting tonight about Miss Clara. She says they're going to vote on whether she should stay or go." Jacob's blood ran cold. "What kind of meeting, Sarah?" "I don't know, but Mama seemed real mad about something." Clara's face went pale, but she kept her voice steady. "Sarah, tell your mother I'd be happy to meet with anyone who has concerns about my teaching." After school ended and the children scattered home, Jacob walked Clara back to the hotel. The main street buzzed with whispered conversations that stopped whenever they appeared. Windows had eyes behind them, and Jacob felt like he and Clara were animals in a cage. "They're all talking about me," Clara said quietly. "I can feel their stares." "Let them talk," Jacob said. "You've done nothing wrong." "Haven't I?" Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. "I came here to marry Henry, but I spend most of my time with you. People notice things like that." Jacob felt heat rise in his cheeks. It was true. Over the past 3 weeks, he and Clara had become close friends. They talked about books and dreams and the future. She made him laugh for the first time since Margaret left, but they'd never done anything improper. "Henry doesn't mind," Jacob said. "He knows we're just friends." "Are we?" Clara asked softly. "Just friends?" Before Jacob could answer, the hotel door burst open. Henry stumbled out, his face red with anger and whiskey. "There you are," he shouted. "Both of you." "Henry, what's wrong?" Clara asked, reaching for his arm. "What's wrong?" Henry laughed bitterly. "I just came from Murphy's saloon. You know what they're saying in there? They're saying my bride is spending more time with my neighbor than with me." "That's not true," Clara said. "Jacob's been helping me with the school, that's all." "Is it?" Henry swayed on his feet. "Because it sure looks like something else to me. Looks like you two are getting mighty close." Jacob stepped forward. "Henry, you're drunk. Go home and sleep it off. Don't tell me what to do." Henry pushed Jacob hard, sending him stumbling backward. "I brought Clara here to be my wife, not to watch her fall for someone else." "Henry, please," Clara said, tears in her eyes. "You're making a scene." "Good," Henry shouted. "Maybe it's time everyone knew the truth. Maybe it's time they knew that Jacob Mercer can't keep his hands off other men's women." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. Around them, people stopped and stared. Shopkeepers came out of their stores. Children peeked around their mother's skirts. "That's enough," Jacob said quietly. "Go home, Henry." "Or what? You'll steal my bride completely? Just like you let your own wife run off with another man?" The street went dead silent. Jacob felt every eye on him, saw the mixture of pity and judgment in their faces. Margaret's betrayal was common knowledge, but hearing it thrown in his face like this, in front of Clara, made him feel sick. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "I'm so sorry this is happening." Jacob looked at her kind face, saw the pain there, and made a decision that would change everything. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand. "Let's get out of here." As they walked away from the crowd, Jacob heard Henry calling after them, his voice broken and desperate. "Clara, don't go with him, please!" But Clara didn't look back. She kept walking, her hand warm in Jacob's, while the whole town watched them disappear into the gathering storm. Behind them, someone in the crowd smiled with satisfaction. The anonymous letter writer had gotten exactly what they wanted. Clara Whitfield was finally being driven away from Millbrook, and the two men who cared about her were destroying each other in the process. Rain hammered against the schoolhouse windows like angry fists as Jacob and Clara sat trapped inside, watching the storm turn the world outside into a gray, violent blur. They'd been caught by the sudden weather while checking on the roof repairs, and now lightning split the sky every few seconds, making it too dangerous to venture out. "We should have seen this coming," Clara said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "The animals were all acting strange this morning." Jacob fed another log to the small potbelly stove, trying to keep the chill away. Old Pete Morrison always said his bad knee could predict weather better than any almanac. I should have listened when he was complaining about it yesterday. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. The events of the afternoon felt heavy between them. Henry's angry words, the staring crowd, the way Clara's hand had felt in his as they walked away together. "Tell me about your wife," Clara said suddenly. Jacob's hand stilled on the poker he'd been using to stir the coals. "What do you want to know?" "What was she like? Before she left, I mean." Jacob leaned back in his chair, searching for the right words. "Margaret was beautiful, smart. She could make anyone laugh, make them feel like they were the most important person in the world. When she smiled at me, I felt like I could do anything." "You still love her," Clara said quietly, I thought I did. Jacob stared into the flames. But now I'm not sure I ever really knew her. She said I was too quiet, too boring. Said living with me was like being slowly strangled. That's cruel. Maybe it was true. Clara turned to face him fully. Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare let her words make you believe you're not worthy of love. Aren't I? Jacob laughed bitterly. My own wife couldn't stand being married to me. She'd rather live in scandal with another man than spend one more day as my wife. Then she was a fool. The words hung in the air between them, charged with more than just friendship. Jacob looked at Clara, really looked at her, and saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. Clara, I know, she said quickly. I know this is complicated. I know people are already talking about us, but I can't help how I feel. How do you feel? Like I've been walking around half alive my whole life, and suddenly I can breathe again. Clara's cheeks flushed pink. Is that terrible of me? I came here to marry Henry, and instead I'm falling for his best friend. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs. You're falling for me? Oh, Jacob. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I've been falling for you since the day you told me not to let that letter writer win. Since you stood up for me, when everyone else just stared. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the schoolhouse in brilliant white light. In that moment, Jacob saw everything clearly, his lonely future without Clara, the way she made him feel alive again, the possibility of real love built on friendship and respect instead of just passion. I've been falling for you too, he said, and it scares me to death. Why? Because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone properly. Margaret proved that. Clara stood up and moved to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. My father used to beat my mother, she said quietly. Every night when he came home from the tavern, he'd find some reason to hit her. She'd make excuses, say she deserved it, say she should have been a better wife. Jacob felt anger rise in his chest. Clara, I swore I'd never let a man treat me that way. But you know what's funny? I ended up choosing men who hurt me in different ways. Men who made me feel small and worthless with their words instead of their fists. Is that why you answered Henry's advertisement? Partly. Clara turned back to him. I thought if I could find a good man, a simple man who just wanted a wife and family, maybe I could finally be happy. Maybe I could finally feel safe. And now I realize I don't want to feel safe. I want to feel alive. I want to feel like I matter to someone, like my thoughts and dreams are worth hearing. Jacob stood up and walked to her. They are worth hearing. You matter more than you know. To you? To me? The storm outside began to weaken, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy looking at each other, seeing possibilities they'd never dared imagine. What do we do now? Clara asked. I don't know, Jacob said honestly. Henry's my friend. He's hurting, and I'm part of the reason why. He's not really in love with me, Clara said. He's in love with the idea of me, with the woman he created in his mind from my letters. The real me disappointed him from the moment I arrived. How do you know? Because he's never asked me about my dreams, my fears, my hopes for the future. He talks about the children we'll have and the garden I'll plant, but he's never asked me if I want those things. Jacob thought about his conversations with Clara over the past 3 weeks. They'd talked about everything, books and music, and whether the railroad would ever reach Wyoming. He knew she was afraid of spiders but not snakes, that she'd always wanted to see the ocean, that she dreamed of opening a real school someday. What do you want, Clara? Really want? She looked at him with such tenderness that his breath caught. I want to be loved for who I am, not who someone thinks I should be. I want to build a life with someone who sees me as a partner, not just a wife. I want to matter. You matter to me, Jacob said, taking her hands. More than you know. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and they both realized the storm was moving away. Soon, they'd have to leave this warm, safe place and face the real world again. Henry's heartbreak, the town's gossip, the anonymous letters that grew more threatening each day. Jacob, Clara said, whoever's been writing those letters knows about us. They've been watching us, waiting for something like this to happen. I know. Jacob's jaw tightened. And I think I know who it is. Who? Before Jacob could answer, they heard footsteps on the schoolhouse porch. Heavy boots, more than one person. Clara gripped Jacob's hand tighter. "Open up," a man's voice shouted. "We know you're in there." Jacob and Clara exchanged a look of fear. The letter writer's deadline was still 3 days away, but apparently, someone had decided not to wait. Blood trickled down Jacob's forehead as he pressed his back against the schoolhouse door, holding it shut while angry voices shouted outside. Clara stood frozen by the window, her face white with terror as she watched torches flicker through the rain-soaked darkness. "We know what you've been doing in there," Sheriff Coleman's voice boomed from the porch. "Come out now, and nobody gets hurt." Jacob's mind raced. Sheriff Coleman was supposed to protect people, not threaten them. Something was very wrong here. "What do you want, Sheriff?" Jacob called back. "I want you to stop corrupting that innocent woman. The good people of this town won't stand for it anymore." Clara moved away from the window, her hands shaking. "There are at least 6 men out there," she whispered. "They all have guns." Jacob grabbed the poker from beside the stove. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. "Stay behind me," he told Clara, "no matter what happens." The door rattled as someone kicked it hard. "Last warning, Mercer. Send the woman out, and we'll let you live." "Over my dead body," Jacob muttered. Then louder, "Clara's done nothing wrong. Leave her alone." "Nothing wrong?" A new voice joined the sheriff's, mean and sharp like broken glass. "She's a loose woman, who came here to seduce honest men. First Henry, now you." Jacob's blood ran cold. He recognized that voice. It belonged to Mrs. Abigail Thornton, the banker's wife and the most powerful woman in Millbrook. She ran the Ladies' Aid Society like a general commanding an army, and what she said, the other women believed. "Mrs. Thornton," Clara called out, her voice stronger than Jacob expected. "If you have something to say to me, have the courage to say it to my face. Don't you dare talk to me about courage, you little harlot. I've been watching you, batting your eyes at every man in town." "That's a lie." Clara's fear was turning to anger now. "I've done nothing but try to help the children learn to read." "Teaching children?" Mrs. Thornton laughed harshly. "Is that what you call spending every day alone with Jacob Mercer? Is that what you call holding hands in the middle of Main Street?" Jacob realized they'd been watched more closely than he'd imagined. Every conversation, every shared glance, every moment of friendship had been twisted into something ugly by people who wanted to see the worst in everything. "Break down that door," someone yelled from outside. The door shuddered under another kick, and Jacob heard wood beginning to crack. They had maybe minutes before the mob broke through. He looked around the schoolhouse desperately, searching for another way out. "The back window," Clara said, reading his thoughts. "It's small, but we might fit." Jacob shook his head. "They'll have men watching the back too. Mrs. Thornton's too smart to leave us an easy escape." Outside, the voices grew louder and more dangerous. Jacob could hear Henry among them now, drunk and heartbroken, and looking for someone to blame for his pain. "Clara!" Henry's voice cracked with emotion. "Please, just come out and talk to me. We can work this out." "Poor Henry," Clara said sadly. "He doesn't understand what's really happening here." "What is really happening here?" Jacob asked. Clara moved to the front window and peered out carefully. "Mrs. Thornton wrote those letters," she said quietly. "I'm sure of it now." "How do you know?" "Because this isn't about morality or protecting the town's reputation. This is about power." Clara's voice grew firm with understanding. "Mrs. Thornton runs everything in Millbrook through fear and gossip, but I'm an outsider who doesn't follow her rules. I make my own decisions, speak my own mind. That threatens everything she's built." Jacob felt pieces clicking together in his mind. She's been planning this from the beginning. Yes, the fake letter to Henry, the anonymous threats, turning the whole town against me. It's all been leading to this moment. The door cracked louder, and Jacob could see torchlight through the growing gap. "What does she want?" "She wants me gone, but not quietly. She wants me destroyed, humiliated, so completely ruined that no other independent woman will ever dare come to Millbrook. And me?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You're just collateral damage, a way to make the story even more scandalous." The door finally gave way with a splintering crash. Sheriff Coleman stepped through first, his gun drawn but pointed at the floor. Behind him came Mrs. Thornton, wrapped in a black cloak like some kind of dark angel. Her face was hard with righteous anger. "Step away from her, Jacob," the sheriff said. "Nobody wants to hurt you." "But they will if I don't cooperate," Jacob said. It wasn't a question. Mrs. Thornton smiled coldly. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Mr. Mercer." "Smart enough to know this isn't about justice," Jacob replied. "This is about you keeping control of this town. This town needs control." Mrs. Thornton snapped. "Without proper moral guidance, communities fall apart. Women like this one," she pointed at Clara, "bring nothing but chaos and sin." "Women like me who think for themselves," Clara said, stepping forward bravely. "Women who don't bow down to bullies like you." Mrs. Thornton's face flushed red with rage. "How dare you? I've dedicated my life to making Millbrook a respectable place to raise families." "You've dedicated your life to making people afraid of you," Clara shot back. "There's a difference." The tension in the room crackled like electricity before a lightning strike. Jacob could see more men gathering outside, their faces hard with mob mentality. Whatever happened next would determine not just his and Clara's fate, but the kind of town Millbrook would become. "Last chance," Mrs. Thornton said softly. "Miss Whitfield leaves on tomorrow's stage, quietly and without fuss. Mr. Mercer apologizes publicly for his inappropriate behavior. Everyone goes back to their normal lives." "And if we refuse?" Jacob asked. Mrs. Thornton's smile turned predatory. "Then the whole town learns some very interesting things about both of you. Things that would make it impossible for either of you to show your faces in decent society ever again." Clara grabbed Jacob's hand. "What kind of things?" "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Thornton purred. "You'd be amazed what people will believe when the story comes from a trusted source. A story about secret meetings, about a desperate woman who seduced a grieving widower, about ungodly behavior in the very schoolhouse where innocent children learn their letters." Jacob felt sick. Even if the stories were lies, the damage would be done. In a small town like Millbrook, reputation was everything. Once lost, it could never be truly recovered. But as he looked at Clara's brave face, at the way she refused to bow down even when surrounded by enemies, Jacob realized something important. He'd rather face the world as a ruined man with Clara beside him than live safely as a coward without her. "We refuse," he said quietly. The letter arrived at dawn, delivered by a nervous boy who wouldn't meet Jacob's eyes. Jacob's hands trembled as he unfolded the expensive paper, recognizing Margaret's elegant handwriting immediately. The words seemed to dance before his tired eyes. "My dearest Jacob, I have made the most terrible mistake of my life." Clara sat beside him at his kitchen table, her face pale in the early morning light. They'd spent the night at his cabin after escaping the mob through the schoolhouse's back window, and neither had slept much. The events of the previous evening felt like a nightmare that refused to end. "She's coming back," Jacob said, his voice hollow. "Margaret. She says Richard abandoned her in Denver. She'll be on today's afternoon stage." Clara's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "Today?" "She says she's learned her lesson about running away from good things. Says she wants to be the wife I deserve." Jacob laughed bitterly. 8 months too late." "Maybe it's not too late," Clara said quietly. Jacob looked at her in shock. "What do you mean?" "You loved her once. Maybe you still do. Deep down. Maybe this is your chance to get back the life you wanted." "Clara, no." Jacob reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "That life is over. I'm not the same man Margaret left behind." "Aren't you?" Clara stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains. "She's your wife, Jacob. Your legal wife. What we have. It's not real. It can't be real." "Don't say that." "It's true." Clara's voice was steady, but Jacob could hear the pain underneath. "I was fooling myself, thinking I could find happiness by running away from my old life. But you can't build something good on someone else's broken foundation." Jacob felt panic rising in his chest. "You're not making sense. Last night you said you were falling for me." "Last night I was caught up in the moment, but morning has a way of showing you the truth. Clara turned to face him, and Jacob saw tears in her eyes. "Your wife is coming home, Jacob. Your real wife. The woman you made vows to before God. Vows she broke when she ran off with another man. Vows you can renew if you forgive her." Jacob stared at Clara in disbelief. "You want me to take her back? After everything she did to me?" "I want you to be happy," Clara said simply. "And maybe happiness means giving love a second chance." "What about Henry? What about your second chance?" Clara's laugh was sad and empty. "Henry never loved me. He loved the idea of having a wife, any wife. And I thought I could learn to love him back. But I was wrong. Some things can't be forced." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jacob opened it to find Henry standing on the porch, hat in hand, looking more sober and serious than Jacob had ever seen him. "Can I come in?" Henry asked. "I need to say some things." Jacob stepped aside, and Henry entered the cabin. He nodded politely to Clara, then sat down heavily in one of the wooden chairs. "I owe you both an apology," Henry said. "What I did last night, getting drunk and causing trouble, that wasn't right. I let my hurt feelings turn me into someone I don't like." "Henry?" Jacob started. "Let me finish." Henry held up his hand. "I've been thinking all night about this whole mess. About Clara, about you, about what I really want from life." Clara sat back down at the table. "What do you want, Henry?" "I want to be honest," Henry said. "The truth is, I asked for a mail-order bride because I was lonely. My cabin felt empty. My life felt empty. I thought having a wife would fix that." "And now?" Clara asked gently. "Now I realize I was trying to use you to fill a hole in my life that only I can fill." Henry's voice was thick with emotion. "That's not fair to you, and it's not love. Real love wants what's best for the other person, even if it hurts." Jacob felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "What are you saying, Henry?" "I'm saying Clara deserves better than a man who sees her as a solution to his problems. She deserves someone who loves her for who she is, not what she can do for him." "Like Jacob," Clara said softly. Henry nodded. "Like Jacob. I've watched you two together these past weeks. The way you talk, the way you laugh, the way you look at each other. That's real love, and I'd be a fool to stand in the way of it." "But Margaret's coming back," Clara said. "Jacob's wife is coming back." Henry's eyebrows shot up. "She is?" Jacob showed him the letter. Henry read it carefully, then looked up with a frown. "This doesn't sound like the Margaret I remember." "What do you mean?" "Margaret was many things, but humble wasn't one of them. This letter talks about learning lessons and being grateful. That doesn't sound like her." Clara leaned forward. "You think someone else wrote it?" "I think," Henry said slowly, "that Mrs. Thornton isn't finished with us yet." Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. "You think this is another trick?" "I think Mrs. Thornton is desperate to get Clara out of town and you back under control. What better way than to bring back your wife?" "But how could she fake a letter from Margaret?" Henry stood up and paced to the window. "Mrs. Thornton has connections everywhere. Her brother lives in Denver. It wouldn't be hard to find out about Margaret's situation and use it." "You're saying Margaret isn't really coming back?" Clara asked. "I'm saying we should be very careful about believing anything that seems too convenient." Henry turned back to them. "Mrs. Thornton played us all last night. Made me think you two were betraying me. Made the town think you were corrupting their children. Why wouldn't she try something like this?" Jacob felt hope and fear warring in his chest. Hope that he wouldn't have to face Margaret again. Fear that they were all still trapped in Mrs. Thornton's web of lies and manipulation. "What do we do?" he asked. "We wait for that stage," Henry said, "and we see who gets off it." Clara stood up suddenly. "No, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living in this town where people want to destroy me. I'm leaving on today's stage, before it heads back east." "Clara, no," Jacob said desperately. "It's for the best." Clara's voice was firm. "If Margaret really is coming back, you two need time to work things out without me complicating everything. And if she's not, if this is another trick, then at least Mrs. Thornton gets what she wants and leaves you alone." "But what about what you want?" Jacob asked. Clara looked at him with such sadness that his heart broke. What I want doesn't matter anymore. I brought nothing but trouble to this town. It's time for me to go." As she walked toward the door, Jacob realized he had a choice to make. He could let Clara leave and spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. Or he could fight for the love he'd found, no matter what the cost. "Clara, wait," he called. "If you're leaving, I'm coming with you." She stopped with her hand on the door handle. "Jacob, I mean it. We'll start over somewhere new, somewhere Mrs. Thornton can't hurt us. What about your land, your life here?" Jacob looked around the cabin that had been his home for 5 years. Then he looked at Clara, and suddenly the choice seemed easy. "My life is wherever you are," he said simply. The afternoon stage rolled into Millbrook with a cloud of dust and the thunder of hooves, but it was the woman who stepped down that made Jacob's world stop spinning. Margaret looked exactly as he remembered. Golden hair perfectly arranged, traveling dress without a wrinkle, skin like porcelain that had never known hard work or worry. "Jacob, my darling," she said, moving toward him with the grace of a dancer. "Thank God you're here. I was so afraid you might not come to meet me." Jacob stood frozen on the platform, Clara beside him with her own traveling bag in hand. The whole town had gathered to witness this moment. Mrs. Thornton with a satisfied smile, Henry looking worried, Sheriff Coleman watching everything with narrow eyes. "Margaret," Jacob said, his voice coming out like a croak, "you came." "Of course I came." Margaret's blue eyes filled with tears that looked real enough. "I've been such a fool, Jacob. Such a terrible, selfish fool. Can you ever forgive me?" Behind Margaret, another passenger stepped down from the stage. A tall man with dark hair and expensive clothes. He carried himself like someone used to getting his way, and when he looked at Margaret, his eyes held possession, not love. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friends, darling?" the man said to Margaret, his voice smooth as silk. Margaret's face went pale. "Richard, I thought we agreed you would stay in Denver." "Plans change," Richard said with a cold smile. "I decided I wanted to see this charming little town you've been telling me about." Jacob felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. "You didn't come back alone." "I can't explain," Margaret said quickly, but her perfect composure was starting to crack. "Richard insisted on escorting me safely. He was concerned about me traveling alone." "How thoughtful," Clara said quietly, but her voice carried a sharp edge that made several people turn to look at her. Richard's gaze settled on Clara with obvious interest. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "This is Clara," Jacob said, stepping protectively closer to her. "She's a friend." "Just a friend?" Richard's smile grew wider. How disappointing. A woman that beautiful should never be just anyone's friend. The air on the platform grew thick with tension. Jacob could see Mrs. Thornton watching everything with growing alarm. This wasn't how her plan was supposed to unfold. "Richard," Margaret said, her voice sharp with warning, "we discussed this. We discussed many things, my dear, but seeing this quaint little town has given me some new ideas." Henry stepped forward from the crowd. "Maybe we should all move this conversation somewhere more private." "Excellent suggestion," Mrs. Thornton said quickly. "Margaret, you must be exhausted from your journey. Why don't you rest at the hotel while you and Jacob have a chance to talk?" "Actually," Richard said, "I think I'd prefer to hear what everyone has to say right here, in front of the whole town. I'm fascinated by small-town dynamics." Jacob felt a trap closing around them all. Richard wasn't just Margaret's lover. He was something much more dangerous. The way he spoke, the way he looked at people like they were pieces on a chessboard, reminded Jacob of the confidence men who sometimes passed through Millbrook looking for easy marks. "What do you want?" Jacob asked bluntly. Richard laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Direct. I like that. What I want, Mr. Mercer, is to understand why my Margaret felt the need to come crawling back to a man who clearly doesn't want her anymore." "I never said I didn't want her," Jacob said, though the words felt like lies in his mouth. "Didn't you?" Richard's eyes glittered with malice. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you've found yourself a replacement, a younger, prettier replacement." Clara's hand found Jacob's arm. "Stop this," she said firmly. "Whatever game you're playing, stop it. Game? Richard's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. My dear girl, this isn't a game. This is business. Mrs. Thornton stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but I think, Richard interrupted smoothly, that I'm the man who's about to offer this charming town a proposition they can't refuse. The crowd murmured nervously. Jacob felt Clara's grip tighten on his arm. You see, Richard continued, Margaret has told me all about your little community here. How close-knit you all are. How you look out for each other. But she's also told me about your recent troubles. He gestured toward Clara. Accusations of impropriety, threats of violence, good Christian folk turning into an angry mob. Very unfortunate. Very bad for business. What business? Sheriff Coleman demanded. Richard smiled like a predator. The railroad business, Sheriff. You see, there are some very important men in Denver who are deciding where to run the new rail line through Wyoming territory. Millbrook is being considered for a major stop, a depot that would bring prosperity and growth to your community. The crowd stirred with excitement. A railroad stop would transform Millbrook from a struggling settlement into a real town. But, Richard continued, the railroad company is very particular about the moral character of the communities they partner with. They can't afford to be associated with towns that have reputations for scandal. Jacob felt ice in his veins. You're threatening us. Threatening? Richard laughed. I'm offering you a choice. Miss Whitfield leaves town quietly. You take back your wayward wife, and everyone goes back to their proper places. In return, Millbrook gets its railroad stop and all the prosperity that comes with it. And if we refuse? Clara asked. Richard's smile turned cruel. Then I returned to Denver with some very disturbing stories about the moral decay in Millbrook. Stories about mail-order brides seducing married men, about good wives driven away by adultery, about a community that can't control its own citizens. Mrs. Thornton looked like she was going to faint. You can't do this. Can't I? Richard pulled out a leather portfolio. I have letters of introduction from 3 different railroad executives. I have documentation of my fact-finding mission to evaluate potential depot locations. I have everything I need to either recommend Millbrook for prosperity or condemn it to continued isolation. The crowd began to murmur angrily. Jacob could see the calculation in their faces. Prosperity for the many versus happiness for the few. How much time do we have? Jacob asked quietly. The evening stage returns to Denver at sunset, Richard said. Miss Whitfield can be on it, along with a glowing report about Millbrook's moral fiber. Or she can stay, and I'll have some very different stories to tell. Jacob looked at Clara, saw the defeat in her eyes, and realized that Mrs. Thornton had been playing a much smaller game than they'd imagined. The real enemy had just revealed himself, and he had weapons they couldn't fight. Choose wisely, Richard said softly. The future of your entire town hangs in the balance. The hotel dining room buzzed with whispered conversations as the sun began to set over Millbrook's main street. Clara sat alone at a corner table, her packed bags beside her chair, watching the town struggle with an impossible choice. Through the window, she could see people gathering in small groups, their faces tight with worry and anger. Mind if I sit? Henry asked, appearing beside her table with 2 cups of coffee. Of course, Clara gestured to the empty chair. Though, I'm not sure you should be seen talking to me. It might hurt your standing in town. Henry set down the coffee and settled into his chair with a heavy sigh. My standing in this town is the least of my worries right now. You think Richard is telling the truth? About the railroad? I think Richard is the kind of man who makes a living by finding people's weak spots and pressing hard. Henry's voice was grim. Whether he's telling the truth about the railroad doesn't matter. He's found our weak spot. We all want to believe Millbrook has a future. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. So I leave, and everyone gets what they want. Everyone except you and Jacob. Jacob will be fine. He'll take Margaret back. They'll work things out. And in a few years, this will all seem like a bad dream. Henry studied her face carefully. You don't really believe that. I have to believe it. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Because the alternative is that I'm destroying an entire town for my own selfish happiness. Love isn't selfish, Clara. isn't it? Clara looked around the dining room at the worried faces of the townspeople. Look at them, Henry. They're afraid of losing their future because of me. How is my happiness worth more than theirs? Before Henry could answer, the dining room door opened and Jacob walked in. His face was haggard, his clothes wrinkled from a day of impossible conversations. He spotted Clara immediately and crossed the room with determined steps. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Jacob, I don't think—" "Please." The word came out raw and desperate. "Just give me 5 minutes." Clara looked at Henry, who nodded encouragingly. 5 minutes, she agreed. Jacob sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. "I've been thinking about what Richard said, about choices and sacrifices and the greater good. And I think he's counting on us to be noble. He's counting on us to sacrifice our happiness for everyone else's benefit." Clara felt a spark of hope, quickly smothered by reality. Maybe we should be noble. Maybe that's what good people do. Or maybe, Jacob said quietly, good people fight for what's right, even when it's hard. How do we fight a man like Richard? He holds all the cards. Jacob leaned forward, his eyes intense. By calling his bluff. What if it's not a bluff? Then we lose, but if we don't try, we lose anyway. Henry cleared his throat. What exactly are you thinking, Jacob? I'm thinking Richard made one mistake. He told us too much. Jacob's voice grew stronger. He said he had letters of introduction from railroad executives. He said he was on a fact-finding mission. But what if we could prove he's lying? How? The telegraph office stays open until 8 o'clock. We could send a wire to Denver, to the railroad headquarters. Ask them if they sent anyone to evaluate Millbrook. Clara felt her heart racing. And if they say no? Then we expose Richard as a fraud in front of the whole town. And if they say yes? Jacob's face hardened. Then we know what we're really up against. The dining room door opened again, and Mrs. Thornton entered with Margaret close behind. Both women looked determined and slightly desperate. They approached Clara's table with the confidence of people who believed they held the moral high ground. Miss Whitfield, Mrs. Thornton said formally, I hope you're prepared to do the right thing. I'm prepared to do what's necessary, Clara replied carefully. Margaret stepped forward, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. I know you must think I'm terrible for leaving Jacob the way I did, and I know you must have feelings for him. But he's my husband, and we belong together. Do you? Clara asked quietly. Belong together? Margaret's composure flickered for just a moment. Of course we do. We made vows before God. Vows you broke when you ran away with another man. I made a mistake, but I'm here now, ready to make amends. Surely that counts for something. Clara studied Margaret's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse. What she saw instead was desperation mixed with something that looked almost like fear. What does Richard really want, Margaret? Clara asked suddenly. Margaret's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. This isn't about love or marriage or moral character. This is about something else entirely. You're being ridiculous, Mrs. Thornton said sharply. Mr. Richard is simply concerned about the moral climate of potential railroad stops. Then why, Clara said, standing up slowly, does he keep looking at me like I'm something he wants to own? The question hung in the air like smoke. Margaret's hands started to shake, and Mrs. Thornton's face flushed with anger. That's enough, Mrs. Thornton said. The stage leaves in 30 minutes. I suggest you be on it. Actually, Jacob said, standing up beside Clara, I suggest we all take a walk to the telegraph office first. Why? Margaret asked nervously. To send a wire to Denver, to verify Richard's story about the railroad. Mrs. Thornton laughed harshly. Don't be ridiculous. Why would he lie about something so easily checked? Why indeed, Jacob said with a slight smile. Unless he's counting on us being too scared to check. Through the window, Clara could see Richard standing on the hotel porch, smoking a cigarette and watching the street with predatory patience. He looked like a man who had never lost a game in his life. Come on, Jacob said, offering Clara his arm. Let's go send that telegram. As they walked toward the door, Clara felt something shift inside her chest, For the first time in days, she wasn't running away from a fight. She was walking toward one, with Jacob beside her and the truth as their only weapon. Behind them, Margaret and Mrs. Thornton exchanged worried glances. Whatever Richard's real plan was, it was about to be put to the test. The telegraph machine clicked and clattered like an angry insect as old Tom Webster tapped out the message to Denver, his weathered fingers dancing across the brass keys with surprising speed. Jacob stood beside Clara in the cramped telegraph office, both of them holding their breath as the machine sent their desperate inquiry across the wires. "There," Tom said, sitting back in his chair. "Message sent to Union Pacific Railroad headquarters. Ask them straight out if they sent anyone named Richard to evaluate Millbrook for a depot. Should get an answer within the hour." Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of blood. Through the office window, Jacob could see people gathering in the street, their faces anxious as word spread about the telegram. Richard stood on the hotel porch, no longer smoking, his confident posture replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. "What if we're wrong?" Clara asked quietly. "What if Richard really is who he says he is?" "Then we face the truth," Jacob replied. "But at least we'll know what we're really fighting." The office door burst open, and Henry rushed in with his face flushed from running. "Jacob! Clara! You need to see this!" "What's wrong?" Jacob asked. "It's Margaret. She's in the hotel bar, and she's talking about Richard, about why they really came here." Jacob and Clara exchanged glances. "What's she saying?" "You need to hear it for yourselves." "But Jacob," Henry's face was grim, "she's scared, really scared, and drunk enough to tell the truth." They hurried across the street to Murphy's Hotel, where a crowd had gathered around the bar. Margaret sat on a stool, her perfect hair disheveled, her elegant dress wrinkled. She clutched a glass of whiskey with shaking hands, and her blue eyes were wide with panic. "He said it would be easy," Margaret was saying to anyone who would listen. "Just a simple confidence game. Come back to my husband, make everyone believe I was sorry, then Richard would work his magic with the railroad story." Mrs. Thornton stood nearby, her face white with shock. "Margaret, what are you talking about?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "Oh, Abigail, you sweet fool. Did you really think Richard cared about your little moral crusade? He's been using you since the moment we arrived." "Using me? How?" "The letters." Margaret's voice rose to nearly a shout. "Richard wrote those anonymous letters to Clara. He told you exactly what to say, exactly how to turn the town against her. You thought you were protecting Millbrook's reputation, but you were just doing Richard's dirty work." The crowd gasped. Jacob felt Clara's hand slip into his as they pushed closer to hear. "Why?" Sheriff Coleman demanded. "Why go to all this trouble?" Margaret took another gulp of whiskey. "Because Clara saw through him immediately. The first moment Richard laid eyes on her, he wanted her. But she looked at him like he was something nasty she'd found under a rock." "So this whole thing," Clara began, "was Richard's way of getting rid of Jacob and isolating you?" Margaret finished. "Make you desperate, make you vulnerable, then swoop in as your rescuer when everyone else turned against you." Jacob felt rage building in his chest. Where is he now? Upstairs, probably counting his money and planning his next move. Margaret's laugh turned into a sob. "He never loved me, you know. I was just useful." A way to get close to Jacob, to learn about the town, to find the pressure points he could use. Mrs. Thornton sank into a chair, her face gray with understanding. "I helped him. I did exactly what he wanted me to do." "We all did," Henry said grimly. "He played us like puppets." The telegraph office bell began to ring frantically across the street. Tom Webster appeared in the doorway, waving a piece of paper. "Message from Denver," he shouted. "Union Pacific says they never heard of any Richard. Says they got no plans for a depot in Millbrook. Says the whole thing's a lie." The crowd erupted in angry voices. People who had been ready to sacrifice Clara for the promise of prosperity now realized they'd been fooled by a man who saw them as easy marks. "Where is he?" someone yelled. "Find him," another voice called. Jacob grabbed Clara's hand. "Come on. We need to get to him before the mob does." They pushed through the angry crowd and up the hotel stairs. Jacob could hear heavy footsteps behind them as half the town followed. At the top of the stairs, they found Richard's door standing open and the room empty. "Windows open," Henry observed, peering out into the alley. "He must have climbed down when he heard the commotion." "The stage," Clara said suddenly. "The evening stage to Denver." They raced back downstairs and out into the street. In the distance, they could see dust rising from the road leading out of town. The stage was already moving, carrying Richard away from the consequences of his lies. "He's gone," Jacob said. "Good riddance," someone in the crowd muttered. But Clara was staring at something else. "Look," she said, pointing to the hotel porch. Margaret stood there alone, her face streaked with tears, holding a small carpet bag. She looked smaller somehow, like all the fight had gone out of her. "I'm sorry," she called out, her voice carrying across the street. "I'm sorry for all of it, for leaving you, Jacob, for helping Richard hurt innocent people, for being such a coward." The crowd fell silent. Jacob found himself walking toward his wife, his legal wife, the woman he'd once loved more than life itself. "Where will you go?" he asked when he reached the porch. "I don't know. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere I can start over and try to become someone better than I am." "Margaret." "No, Jacob. Don't say anything kind. I don't deserve it." Margaret looked past him to where Clara stood with the crowd. "Take care of her. She's worth 100 of me." "I know," Jacob said simply. Margaret's face crumpled. "You really love her, don't you?" "Yes, I do." "Then I guess some good came from all this mess." Margaret shouldered her bag. "I'll walk to the next town. Catch a stage from there. I won't cause you any more trouble." As Margaret walked away into the gathering darkness, Jacob felt a chapter of his life closing forever. The woman he'd married, the woman who'd broken his heart, was disappearing into the night like a ghost finally laid to rest. Clara appeared beside him. "Are you all right?" Jacob looked at her, really looked at her, and saw his future shining in her gray eyes. "I will be," he said. "We will be." Behind them, the crowd was beginning to disperse, people heading home to their families and their normal lives. The crisis was over, but Jacob knew the real work was just beginning. They'd have to rebuild trust, mend relationships, and find a way to move forward together. But for the first time in months, Jacob felt like they actually could move forward. The truth had set them all free, and in that freedom, he and Clara could finally build something real and lasting. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let's go home." Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the schoolhouse as Clara stood before a room full of children and their parents, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. 3 days had passed since Richard's deception was exposed, and the town was still healing from the wounds of mistrust and manipulation. "Before we begin today's lesson," Clara said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room, "I want to say something to all of you." Jacob sat in the back row, his heart pounding as he watched the woman he loved face down the very people who had threatened to destroy her just days before. Mrs. Thornton sat in the front row, her face pale but attentive, while Henry stood near the door like a guardian angel. "I came to Millbrook as a stranger," Clara continued, "hoping to find a new life and a place to belong. Instead, I found something more valuable than I ever imagined. I found people willing to fight for the truth, even when it was hard to hear." Little Emma Patterson raised her hand. "Miss Clara, are you leaving us?" Clara smiled, and Jacob saw tears glittering in her eyes. "No, Emma, I'm not leaving, but I am asking all of you, children and parents alike, if you'll have me stay. Not as Henry's mail-order bride, not as someone trying to fit into a role that doesn't suit me, but as myself, as Clara Whitfield, teacher and neighbor and friend." Mrs. Patterson stood up slowly. "Miss Clara, after everything that's happened, after the way some of us treated you, why would you want to stay?" "Because," Clara said simply, "this is where I belong. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. Because you're all real people with real hearts, and when you were tested, you chose truth over comfort." Old Murphy, the hotel owner, cleared his throat. "What about you and Jacob? Folks are going to talk, you know." Clara's cheeks flushed pink, but her voice remained steady. "Mr. Murphy, people will always talk, but I've learned that living your life according to gossip is no way to live at all. So you and Jacob." Mrs. Thornton began, then stopped. Jacob and I care for each other, Clara said firmly. We care enough to build something honest and true, with or without everyone's approval, but we'd rather have it with your blessing. Jacob stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. If I may say something? Clara nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I married Margaret because I thought that's what a man was supposed to do. Find a pretty wife, make her happy, live quietly, and cause no trouble. Jacob's voice grew stronger as he spoke. But I've learned that real love isn't about following other people's rules. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. And Clara does that for you? Henry asked from the doorway. Every day, Jacob said without hesitation. She makes me braver, kinder, more honest than I ever thought I could be. Sheriff Coleman stood up, his badge glinting in the morning light. Well, I reckon there's only one thing to do about this situation. The room held its breath. We better plan a wedding, the sheriff said with a gruff smile. A proper one this time, with the whole town invited. The room erupted in laughter and applause. Children clapped their hands, mothers wiped away tears, and even stern old Mr. Wilson cracked a smile. But first, Mrs. Thornton said, rising from her seat, I owe some apologies. The room fell quiet again. Clara, I was wrong about you. I let fear and pride cloud my judgment, and I helped a bad man hurt good people. I'm sorry. Mrs. Thornton. No, let me finish. Mrs. Thornton's voice was thick with emotion. I thought I was protecting this town's morals, but I was really just protecting my own power. Real morality isn't about controlling people. It's about helping them become their best selves. She walked over to Clara and extended her hand. Will you forgive a foolish old woman? Clara took the offered hand and pulled Mrs. Thornton into a warm embrace. There's nothing to forgive. We all did the best we could with what we knew. As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about wedding plans and new beginnings, Jacob made his way to the front of the room. Clara was erasing the blackboard, her movements quick and efficient. So, he said softly, are you really staying? Are you really asking me to? I'm asking you to marry me, Jacob said, his heart hammering against his ribs. Properly this time, with a ring and vows and a future we build together. Clara set down the chalk and turned to face him. Jacob Mercer, are you proposing to me in a schoolhouse full of chalk dust and children's drawings? I am. Good, Clara said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. Because I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be proposed to. Through the window, they could see the town of Millbrook going about its daily business. People were working, children were playing, life was continuing as it always had. But something fundamental had changed. They'd all learned that truth was more valuable than comfort, that real community meant supporting each other through hard times, not just good ones. I love you, Jacob whispered against Clara's hair. I love you too, she whispered back. All of you, even the quiet parts that someone else called boring. As they held each other in the morning sunlight, Jacob realized that his first marriage had been built on trying to become someone else's idea of the perfect husband. But this love, this real love, was built on being exactly who he was and finding someone who treasured every part of him. Outside, Henry walked past the schoolhouse window and tipped his hat to them with a grin. He'd found his own peace in recent days, realizing that true friendship sometimes meant stepping aside so others could find happiness. When do you want to have this wedding? Clara asked, pulling back to look into Jacob's eyes. Tomorrow wouldn't be too soon for me, Jacob said. Clara laughed, the sound bright and free. Let's give the town at least a week to plan a proper celebration. After everything we've all been through, we deserve a good party. A week it is, Jacob agreed, though I warn you, it might be the longest week of my life. Good things are worth waiting for, Clara said, echoing the words he'd once told her about not giving up in the face of adversity. As they walked out of the schoolhouse together, hand in hand, Jacob thought about the letter that had started it all, Margaret's cruel words about feeling buried alive. He understood now that the feeling hadn't been about him at all. It had been about trying to live a life that wasn't truly hers. Now, walking into an uncertain but honest future with Clara beside him, Jacob felt more alive than he ever had before. Snow began falling during the wedding ceremony, big white flakes that danced through the air like nature's own celebration, as Clara walked down the aisle of Millbrook's small church. Jacob stood at the altar in his best suit, his hands trembling not from cold but from pure joy, watching the woman who had transformed his life approach him with a smile that outshone the winter sun. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying over the packed church, "we gather today not just to witness a marriage, but to celebrate the triumph of love over fear, truth over deception, and hope over despair." The entire town had turned out for the wedding. Mrs. Thornton sat in the front pew, wearing her finest dress, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Henry stood as Jacob's best man, his face beaming with genuine happiness for his friends. Even Sheriff Coleman had traded his badge for a bow tie and a rare smile. "Jacob," the pastor continued, "do you take Clara to be your wife, to love and cherish her through all of life's storms and sunshine?" "I do," Jacob said, his voice strong and clear, "with all my heart." "And Clara, do you take Jacob to be your husband, to stand beside him as partner and friend, through whatever challenges may come?" Clara looked into Jacob's eyes, seeing not just love, but the promise of a future built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "I do." As they exchanged rings, simple bands that Jacob had carved from mountain cedar, Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wood stove crackling in the corner. This was what real love felt like. Not the desperate need to be completed by someone else, but the quiet joy of choosing to share your complete self with another person. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, full of promise rather than passion, and when they broke apart, the church erupted in cheers and applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, Clara caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the back of the church. Margaret. She wore a simple traveling dress and a hat that shadowed her face, but Clara recognized her immediately. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Margaret nodded once, a gesture that seemed to say goodbye, or perhaps good luck. Then she slipped out the back door and disappeared into the swirling snow. "Did you see?" Clara began. "I saw," Jacob said quietly. "She came to make peace with the past. Are you all right?" Jacob squeezed her hand. "I'm exactly where I want to be." The reception was held in Murphy's hotel dining room, transformed for the occasion with white tablecloths and winter flowers that Mrs. Patterson had somehow coaxed to bloom despite the season. The whole town ate and danced and celebrated as if they were trying to make up for all the fear and suspicion of the past weeks. "Speech! Speech!" someone called out as the evening wore on. Jacob stood up reluctantly, Clara's hand in his, and looked out at the faces of their friends and neighbors. "I'm not much of a speaker," he began, "but I want to thank all of you for something." The room grew quiet. "A few months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I wasn't worthy of love, wasn't capable of making anyone happy. But you all taught me something important. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best things." "Here, here," Henry called out, raising his glass. "Clara didn't just save me," Jacob continued. "She saved this whole town. She showed us what real courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right, even when you're terrified." Clara felt tears stinging her eyes as Jacob's words washed over her. "And all of you," Jacob said, his voice growing stronger, "you showed me what real community means. Yes, we made mistakes. Yes, we let fear and gossip cloud our judgment for a while. But when it mattered most, when we had to choose between truth and comfort, we chose truth." The room erupted in applause again, but Jacob wasn't finished. "So here's to new beginnings," he said, raising his glass, "to second chances, to learning from our mistakes, and to the courage to love openly and honestly, no matter what anyone else might say." "To new beginnings," the crowd echoed. As the evening wound down and guests began heading home through the gently falling snow, Clara found herself alone with Jacob on the hotel's front porch. The street was quiet except for the soft whisper of snowflakes hitting the ground. "Mrs. Mercer," Jacob said, testing out her new name. I like the sound of that, Clara said, nestling closer to him in the cold air. Any regrets? Clara thought about the question seriously. About marrying you? Never. About coming to Millbrook? Not for a minute. About Henry? Jacob tensed slightly. Henry was a good man, who deserved better than someone trying to talk herself into loving him, Clara said gently. And I was a woman who deserved better than settling for safety instead of love. And now I have both, love and safety, but the kind of safety that comes from being truly known and accepted, not the kind that comes from hiding who you really are. Jacob pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side. What do you want to do tomorrow? And the day after that? And all the days after that? Clara smiled, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. I want to teach children to read. I want to have long conversations with you by the fire. I want to plant a garden in the spring and watch it grow. I want to build a life that's so full of small, beautiful moments that we forget we were ever afraid. That sounds perfect. What about you? What do you want? Jacob was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the man he'd been just a few months ago. Broken, defeated, convinced he was unworthy of love. I want to wake up every morning and remember that I'm worthy of happiness. I want to be the kind of husband who deserves a woman like you. I want to help build a town where people can be themselves without fear. You already are that kind of husband, Clara said softly. You already are that kind of man. A shooting star streaked across the winter sky, bright against the falling snow. Clara made a wish, not for anything different, but for the strength to appreciate and protect what she already had. Come on, Jacob said, taking her hand. Let's go home. As they walked through the snow toward Jacob's cabin, their cabin now, Clara reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She'd come to Millbrook expecting to marry one man and ended up falling in love with another. She'd faced down a mob, exposed a con man, and discovered reserves of courage she never knew she possessed. But most importantly, she'd learned that love wasn't about finding someone to complete you. It was about finding someone who inspired you to complete yourself. Behind them, the lights of Millbrook twinkled through the snow like stars that had fallen to earth. It was a small town with small town problems, but it was also a place where people could grow and change and find redemption. It was home. Spring arrived in Millbrook with a burst of wildflowers and the sound of children's laughter echoing from the schoolhouse, where Clara stood at the blackboard teaching a lesson about courage to a room full of eager young faces. 6 months had passed since her wedding to Jacob, and the town had settled into a new rhythm of growth and possibility. Can anyone tell me what courage means? Clara asked, setting down her chalk. Little Tommy Wilson raised his hand. It means you're not scared of anything. That's a good try, Tommy, but not quite right, Clara said gently. Who else has an idea? Emma Patterson, now 8 years old and reading at a level far beyond her years, spoke up thoughtfully. I think courage means you're scared, but you do the right thing anyway. Excellent, Emma. Can you give me an example? Like when you stood up to those mean people who wanted to hurt you, even though you were probably really scared inside. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. That's exactly right. True courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling afraid and choosing to act with kindness and honesty anyway. The classroom door opened, and Jacob appeared with his hat in his hands and dirt on his boots from the fields he'd been plowing. Sorry to interrupt, Miss Clara, but there's someone here to see you. Clara's eyes twinkled at his use of her maiden name, a joke between them that always made the children giggle. Class, please read Chapter 4 in your primers. I'll be right back. Outside the schoolhouse, Clara found a young woman about her own age, standing beside a loaded wagon. She had dark hair and tired eyes, and she clutched a carpet bag with the desperate grip of someone who owned very little. Are you Clara Mercer? The woman asked. I am. How can I help you? My name is Elizabeth Harper. I've come from Colorado, looking for work and a place to start over. The woman's voice was steady, but Clara could hear the fear underneath. Someone in Denver told me there was a town in Wyoming where a woman could make an honest living without being judged for her past. Clara and Jacob exchanged glances. Word of Millbrook's transformation had apparently spread beyond the territory's borders. "What kind of work are you looking for?" Jacob asked kindly. "Anything honest. I can cook, clean, sew, tend animals. I'm not afraid of hard work." "What about your past?" Clara asked gently. "What are you running from?" Elizabeth's chin lifted defiantly. "I was married to a man who beat me. When I finally found the courage to leave, his family spread lies about me all over Colorado. Said I was a loose woman, a thief, all kinds of terrible things that weren't true." Clara felt her heart go out to this brave woman who had risked everything for freedom. "You're safe here, Elizabeth. We understand something about false accusations and small-town gossip. Mrs. Patterson at the hotel needs help in the kitchen," Jacob added. "And there's talk of building a new boarding house for travelers. We could use someone with experience to run it." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "You'd give me a chance? Just like that?" "Just like that," Clara confirmed. "But I should warn you, this town isn't perfect. We've made mistakes, hurt innocent people, let fear guide us when we should have chosen love. But we've learned from those mistakes, and we're trying to do better. That's all anyone can ask for," Elizabeth said softly. As Jacob helped Elizabeth unload her wagon, Clara reflected on how much Millbrook had changed. The town that had once been ready to drive her away with torches and threats was now opening its arms to another woman in need. It wasn't magic. It was the hard work of people choosing growth over comfort, compassion over judgment. "Clara," Elizabeth said as they walked toward the hotel, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you find the strength to stay when everyone turned against you?" Clara thought about the question carefully. "I had help. I had Jacob, who saw my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. I had Henry, who chose friendship over wounded pride. I had people like Mrs. Thornton who were brave enough to admit their mistakes and change. But what if you hadn't had that help? Then I would have had to find the strength within myself, and I think I would have, eventually, because I've learned that our worth doesn't come from other people's opinions of us. It comes from knowing who we are and staying true to that, even when it's hard." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "I hope I can learn to believe that." "You will. It takes time, but you will." That evening, as Clara and Jacob sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Clara told him about her conversation with Elizabeth. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked. "Taking in strangers, giving them second chances without knowing their full stories?" Jacob considered the question. "I think," he said slowly, "that everyone deserves a chance to start over. Maybe not everyone will take that chance and make something good of it, but enough will that it's worth the risk. Even after what happened with Richard and Margaret. Especially after what happened with them. They showed us what happens when people are driven by selfishness and deception. Elizabeth is different. You can see it in her eyes. She's looking for a chance to build something honest and good." Clara leaned against Jacob's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the quiet strength that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. All of you. Your courage, your compassion, your stubborn insistence on seeing the best in people even when they don't deserve it. Is that what I do? That's exactly what you do. It's what saved me, what saved this town, and what's going to save Elizabeth too." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara thought about the letter that had brought her to Millbrook, the cruel deception that had tried to drive her away before she even arrived. That letter had been meant to destroy her dreams, but instead it had led her to something better than she'd ever dared imagine. "Jacob," she said quietly, "do you think we'll always be happy?" "I think," Jacob said, pulling her closer, "that we'll always choose to work for happiness. We'll face problems, make mistakes, have disagreements, but we'll face them together, with honesty and love, and that will be enough." "More than enough," Clara agreed. In the distance, they could hear the sound of laughter from the hotel, where Elizabeth was already making friends with Mrs. Patterson and the other women of the town. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose courage over fear, love over judgment. But tonight, Clara was content to sit beside her husband, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, knowing that love, real, honest, brave love, was indeed enough to build a life on. The weight of letters, both cruel and kind, had taught them that words had power, but they'd also learned that the most important words were the ones they spoke to each other every day. I love you. I believe in you. I choose you. And we'll face whatever comes together. Those were the words that mattered. Those were the words that had set them free.